Hello, hello. Testing my audio. Making sure everything sounds good. Hello, welcome back. I have a new mic this week, which, oh no, looks a little fuzzy from my cat, so I'm just now noticing. I don't want to ASMR you by picking all this cat hair off, so please just ignore it. And I also have a new monitor this week, which is a little higher res. Please do tell me if things are looking a little too small on screen. I scaled it down and amped everything up, so hopefully it'll still be legible, but it'll at least be a little clearer than the 1080p monitor that I was streaming on. Hey Abaddon, thanks for joining in. Glad to have you here. I will go ahead and jump on into code. If you haven't been following along the last couple weeks, I've been pretty much just working on this project on stream. It's a psychological horror game where we're exploring what's fun and what's not with interacting with AI NPCs, and we're also exploring a couple systems where the dialogue that you have with that AI NPC feeds into other AI systems to either guide that first dialogue a little bit more or manipulate the world a little bit. So a couple examples on that is, I guess I'll hop into this room and show it off while I talk, but you wake up in this room, you're not sure why you're here. There's a couple of interactable things in the room, like these lights can flash, so we can control how often they flash, how bright or dark they are when they are or aren't flashing, how long they stay off for. One example of the AI system, the secondary AI system controlling the game world, could be if we detect from something that you say that you're afraid of the dark, or if when this light goes off you run back to this side of the room or something like that. We can basically tune the properties of these lights. It's a really simple example, but there's a lot more we could add to this room. And second, another good example in guiding the conversation would be if we say something that might lead to either like detecting a fear or learning something we can use about the player. We have this secondary system that we will feed the conversation history into for analysis and ask it to generate questions that they want the primary NPC conversation the NPC to ask. So if we say like, I don't know why I'm here. I was a farmer in a field, and I just woke up here. That's probably the worst example or a bad example, but we could have that secondary analysis system say like, oh, okay, well, they're a farmer. They're probably out at night. They're probably not afraid of the dark. But if we wanted more clarification, we've got a little system queue that we can pass questions from that system back to the NPC that you're talking to, and they can weave that into the conversation. So at the next convenient spot that they're talking, the NPC could say something like, oh, yeah, that's crazy. Like, I'm always so afraid of the dark. I don't know how you do it. What do you think of the dark? Something like that. So we're building out this system where you have this kind of surface level conversation with an NPC, which I'm not really seeing a lot of game devs do quite yet, but I think it's becoming more and more popular. But we're also taking it deeper, where we have this more second level analysis on what's saying, which manipulates the game world, and also another layer on top of that to analyze the text and feed it back into the conversation to help either guide the player toward their goals or guide the player toward things that we want to learn from them. So it's a pretty fun system. It's very, very bare bones right now. We've just built it this last couple weeks, so in all we've probably spent about 2 days on it since I've streamed twice. But in general, in this room, you explore it, you pick up this lighter, and then you walk over to this vent, and the in-game explanation of how this conversation starts is somebody in the other room next to you has been locked in their room as well. And so they see the reflections of your lighter through this vent, and they call out like, hey, haven't heard or seen any other humans in a long time. I've been locked out in this room. They will initially think that you are the person that locked them up, because that's a reasonable assumption if they've been locked up and haven't heard anything and suddenly there's a human on the other side of the door. So kind of two things to say on that. One, we have these kind of dynamic goals or scores that we're calling them in the conversation. So every message can adjust these scores, and you can set up different both like spectrums for scores for every NPC. If we wanted, we could give this NPC like trust and friendship, or if you're talking to like a merchant in a game, you could have a slider for how much they'll buy an item for, and so you convince them through the conversation to pay more. The slider goes up in value. You leave the conversation, that's how much they pay. Something like that, where we're kind of trying to take the standard dialogue in games and effectively turn it into an optional minigame where you can kind of progress through the dialogue as you want and learn the story and all that, but you can also, if you're feeling up to it, you can kind of try and trigger things with these scores. So we also built a system last week where if, for example, the trust score passes a certain threshold, then it can trigger some code. So these scores are controlled by the AI. If you say something that would make them trust you more, the next response will give you some trust points, and that goes up. So we can set up these thresholds, and we can basically set events that can happen in this conversation, but the way that you get to those events is different every time based on the conversation. That's a good overview of what we're doing. The last thing I'll say is we're just trying to layer everything onto this conversation and try and get at more replayability, because it's pretty straightforward right now. We're going to build in the actual goals and events this week, today, but I'm thinking right now there's a few goals that you'll hit when you're talking to this vent. So you'll probably want to start out by convincing them that, hey, you're locked in a room as well. You're just another innocent person. You're not the one that locked them out. So in doing that, you will calm them down. You'll lower their fear score. And then you're going to also want to tell them like a story about you. Get them to trust you more. So we built a quest system last week. So we will trigger like another objective that shows up of like, tell them a story about yourself to get them to trust you. We can also adjust the prompt on their side to, once their fear is low enough, we can adjust the prompt to say like, all right, start asking them questions about themselves. And so your goal there will be decrease their fear, calm them down, and then get them to trust you. And then at that point, theoretically, we'll see how it turns out, we'll hopefully have enough information about the player and like the character that they're personifying, who they're playing as, that we can feed that into the system that goes into our second conversation, which will be with this video camera up here, which will have you actually talking to the big bad guy who locked you in this room. So the thinking there is, if you are calming down the person on the other side of this wall by saying like, yeah, I don't know what happened. I was a school teacher and I was on my way home from school and I had a car accident and then I woke up here. Like, that gives a lot of detail that we can work with in constructing a plot. So if we take that whole conversation history and pass it through to another prompt saying, hey, this is the personality of the character that you have locked in a room, generate a reason that you have locked them in that room. And then we pass that, it's called prompt chaining basically, but you pass that into the conversation prompt for the big bad guy. Maybe when he first starts talking to you, he says, hey, like, my kid failed out of your school and wasn't getting the help he needed, so this was the only way I could get your attention. And then your goal as the player is to convince them to let you out. And how you do that is different based on this character that you've unintentionally created, which I think is really cool. So maybe you say like, yeah, I didn't know they needed help, or, oh, it's been really hard, or however you want to do it. You know the goal, you just don't know how to get there, which I think is a key component in like puzzle mechanics, or I guess it's kind of more like a puzzle horror game. Not sure. Well, we can lean more into the horror later of I've got a little twist at the end that I want to play around with, but basically the gist is since you're unintentionally crafting this character as you're talking to this person to calm them down, I feel like there will probably be some replayability in after you've played through once and you kind of know what to do, and you saw that, oh, I told them I was a school teacher, and then the plot was that this guy's kid was not doing well in school. That's crazy. I'm going to play again, and I'm going to tell them I'm a politician or a doctor or a lawyer or the president of the United States, and see what his story is. And you'll still have the goal of like convince him to let you out, but you're going to have new challenges and new like ways to go about it, because he'll have a different backstory of why he put you in that room. So I think it's a very, very simple demo that is both, I mean, it's not technically simple because we've built this whole web of AIs that are talking to each other effectively, but I think it's very simple to understand. Hopefully we'll go back, probably spend a week like polishing, but I kind of want to finish up the gameplay this week so we can get back to some You Are Not Alice streams soon. I want to put it on Steam soon. But I think once you've played through once, we can get enough guidance so you know what to do once. And then once you've played through once, it's a lot of, now you know what you're doing. You can go through and play it over and over again, however you want, really. Maybe you say, you play once and you're like, yeah, I'm actually the devil, and so it'd probably be really hard to convince whoever this person is. Maybe they use your backstory to identify themselves as well. Of like, if you say you're a teacher, they're a student's parent. If you say you're the devil, maybe they say they're like a high priest of some cult or something, and you're convincing them to let you out into the world. So it's kind of, it might be repetitive, we'll see, but I just want to get the gameplay in, and we can tweak it and do some play tests and see how things go. So that is a lot of talking to say, let's get into some code. And I will just reiterate, this is a new monitor, so it's kind of hard to see how big the text is on screen. I'm looking at it on my laptop and it's a little bit small. But my laptop is 1080p, of course. So just let me know. But cool, let's go through, let's just start from the beginning, and we'll walk through like where we're at, and then we'll pick up from there. We've got this room set up. It has a volume on one corner of the room to trigger just a little test objective for our quest. But as you'll see, we have this sort of quest, very, very basic quest system. You start out with an objective of investigate your surroundings. And if you walk into this volume over here, you get another one that says, find something to help you see better. And so you're just kind of exploring the room. You can't really see a lot quite yet. You can right click to squint. You can press E to interact with things. You can walk over here, flush the flush the toilet. Doesn't really do anything. This guy's kind of cool because we have a collider behind the player, which should be able to show, maybe, if I select the player. Yeah, so we have a collider behind the player, as you can see, this big sphere up top. And there's a random chance that when that collides with the trolley on the ground, that it will change its position or change its rotation. We'll get it playing sounds like some metal sounds to be a little creepy. But that was just kind of exploring with different ways to get things triggering when it's out of view, which is kind of a cool mechanic. But if you explore this room, you pick up the lighter. You can eventually walk over here. You can push this out of the way. See this vent. We'll do a little bit more cinematic stuff to pull the camera back, make it more third person, show you sitting down in the corner, that sort of thing to make it a little prettier when you start this conversation. But here's where we're at right now. And let me bring up the prompt that we have for that conversation. So we have a personality for them that is very, very generic. They don't have a name. They've got some random conversation starters because we want to control a little bit of like the start of the conversation, and we'll just keep railroading it back to where we want it to be. We have the ability to set some other stuff for like world consistency in our more reusable library that we've been building, but we're not going to do it on this demo. Keep it nice and simple. But if we go to our prompts, which we have this bad boy who basically says, take the whole game state, which we construct here and insert into the prompt, and use this schema, encode all the game state stuff that we want to include, and respond with the new changes. So that allows us to combine that with this other prompt, which takes the chat history and generates some potential suggested responses. And that builds these. When you click on these or write your own, it goes back to generating a response. We'll have some other prompts that do some of that AI channel analysis stuff that we talked about earlier. But if we say, don't worry, I'll help you. Can you see anything else in your room? We should see both trust and fear, I would imagine, adjust a little bit once we get a response. The responses are a little delayed, but you can see fear went down, trust went up. That makes sense. And so you can have this kind of conversation, both just choosing responses, or you could write your own every time, until we get one or more of these to a certain threshold, and that's when we can trigger code. So that's what we're going to set up first. But I think we probably want to kind of map out our like objective goals that we want for these conversations. So we'll start with what we already have. The player wakes up and does like a short, probably tutorial on how to move, how to interact with stuff. And we'll just call that the introduction. how to move, interact, etc. The next key point that they'll need to do is find the lighter, which is just kind of, I guess, part of that introduction as well. They need to be able to move around, interact with the lighter, pick it up, and then they will interact with the vent. And that'll start this conversation here. So while they talk to the vent, we'll say vent conversation. The gates, or like the plot beats that we want to hit are, we want to calm down the voice on the other side first. And so we will make a note that that is reduce fear to like -1 or below 1. And then we probably want to build that trust by telling them a story. So let's say build their trust, or gain their trust by telling them about yourself. Increase trust to 8. And we can adjust these like thresholds. It might be easier or harder to drop fear like from 7 to 5 versus 3 to 1. Like, I'm not sure exactly how the scales will work quite yet, but since it's controlled by the AI, that's a little bit more playtesting than math. So I feel like we should probably have a third objective here. Just kind of rules of threes. We have 3. We'll probably start with just these 2 scores on the conversation, and then when they're both complete, we'll probably add a third, so you'll still need to like complete whatever that is without losing their trust or building their fear again. So something you would do in a conversation that is like kind of sketchy, so there's the potential for losing their trust, and also kind of scary, so there's the potential of giving them fright. Might be like, I mean, something that comes to mind is like convincing them to not try to escape, or that they should stay in the room, or maybe something dangerous to try and escape, like you should bang on the door. I could see that feeling like a trap, or making them afraid of what might happen. But that doesn't really give us a thing, like any value. We could try and get them to like destroy the vent with us, which could, in the game world, create a lot of noise, which would trigger like a intervention from the camera saying like, hey, I see you, stop doing that. That could be interesting. Because I will say, let's put a placeholder for something that could lose trust or increase fear. The next big conversation is the big bad guy conversation, which you do with the camera. And we will also say other prisoner conversation with vent. So that's where we're going to listen to his monologue about why he locked you in this room. I feel like there should probably be some sort of action that you do on that part, but let's kind of think about what scores we would want in that conversation. I think one of them would be anger. That makes a lot of sense. He's probably really angry at you if he locked you in this room, and maybe decreasing that anger to 0 is a way to get him to let you out. Maybe there's fear, like if you're a doctor and he locked you up because his kid is dying and he needs help. He's afraid that his kid's going to die. Like, if you can convince him that things are going to be okay, maybe that's a way to get him to let you out. And all of these, I think we probably want like a bigger range on them. So maybe if anger goes up to 20 or something and it starts at, I don't know, 7 or 8, the normal max would be 10 and maybe nothing would happen. But if it gets up to 15, 16, 17, maybe that's when you hear a knock at the door opens and the screen goes black because he came in and killed you or something. So lost states in the conversation as well, effectively. Trying to think of other things that might be an interesting, like, persuasive argument in a conversation with somebody who locked you up. Could it be empathy? If anybody watching the stream or even the video afterwards has any ideas, feel free to let me know. Maybe we can work those in as well. I'm just kind of spitballing what might work, and we might even change it before we even implement it. So let's say the first objective is listen to or learn why you've been locked up, and maybe that is trying to think of like how that logistically works. He's probably going to monologue at you for a while, but in order for us to know when we have actually learned that as the player, we could pass each message to like a AI system and say, hi, this does this message fully explain why the player has been locked up, yes or no? And if they say yes, you've progressed through that objective. If they say no, then you keep listening to this monologue. That kind of gets into kind of the challenges that we were seeing in You Are Not Alice, which is the hacker simulator, effectively, where you're convincing your coworkers or the coworkers of the person that you've infected that they need to run a virus file, which will give you access to their computer. But we're going to add in some quests to that as well. So when you learn, oh, Bob actually really wants to get a raise, then you as a player have some options to, you could infect Bob's computer and go talk to his boss and convince his boss to give him a raise. That's a really hard, like, dynamic thing to code a, did this quest complete or not, without implementing something for every single type of quest to say, like, here is the conditions for getting a raise or getting someone else fired or convincing somebody to go on a date with you or whatever you want to do or whatever these characters want you to do. The more dynamic approach that we're considering is feeding those messages into an AI, saying, like, here is the quest, here is the message conversation, is it complete? And I think that might end up being more resilient to dynamic quest generation, which I think would be really cool. And I think it also maps really well to, like, if you consider a big MMORPG or just even an RPG in a town, I think the things that we're building lend really well towards having a web of NPCs that can interact with each other and have, like, wants and needs and preferences and stuff, and getting them to be able to generate their own quests based on their personality and their preferences and the things they've heard from other NPCs even is really, really cool. But you also need to complete that step by saying, like, how do you know when that generated quest is completed? Obviously there's the approach of having some, like, quest templates that you hard code in conditions of completion, but then you get the same types of quests all the time. So we're just trying to figure out how to be able to generate those more dynamic quests and also be able to complete them. So I think that We might end up prototyping for this demo, but we'll see when we get there. That would be specifically for like, learn why you've been locked up. Look at this conversation history. Look at this quest. Does that complete the quest? So big bad guy. We also want to convince them to let you out. And I mean, maybe we'll end up just having rules of twos on rules of twos. We got 2 conversations each with 2 goals. That could work. I think it is a very easy first objective for a player to jump into. I think most people, if they are thrown into a conversation, if you tell them like calm down the other person, they probably can. They don't really need any skill or like, I mean, maybe some social skill. Like, they don't need game knowledge. They don't need strategy. So this first conversation is intentionally very easy and effortless. Like, you're telling them, like, I don't know what's going on either. Like, whoa, 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 I'm not the guy who did this. That's all true. And you're kind of just making up a story about yourself, which can be anything. And that is feeding into this next, more hard conversation. So kind of working on the difficulty scaling that we struggled with You Are Not Alice. Trying to make this conversation a little bit easier, this conversation a little bit harder. And we'll eventually have our final conversation. Well, maybe not. If we convince them to let you out here, maybe that's just you win or you lose. That might be a little boring. I feel like there's a really cool nut to be cracked here, which is talking to both NPCs back and forth. And for example, if we didn't convince them to let you out here, if we maybe convince them to give you a condition to be let out, and that is the goal of like, what do you need me to do in order for you to let me out? If they give you something, that can be a goal. But I think the cool aspect, which also leans a lot more into this psychological horror vibe that we're kind of curating from the graphics, is the final conversation where the big bad guy tells you, hey, I can let you out, but I'm only going to let either you or the other prisoner to go. And you need to convince them that it should be you. Or you need to tell me that it should be them. Like, that's probably the hardest of the 3 conversations. And also the craziest, I would say. It's a big twist. I would say most people have done this sometime in their life. They've calmed someone down. They've told people stories about themselves. People probably haven't, like, been in this sort of situation, but I would say a lot of people have, like, had nightmares or, like, daydream nightmare type things where they've considered what they would say in a situation like this. So it's not completely out of the blue for them. But if you have this final conversation where you need to convince the other voice that you should be the only one let out, then that's like the thing that most people haven't even considered, and it's probably the most difficult conversation, which would make a great, like, final boss, effectively. Hey, Tony Sprocket, thanks for joining me. We're just trying to plan out the story beats, like the goals that you want to hit in these conversations. We've got this cool system in place now where we can define scores for every conversation. So we're talking to the vent in the wall right now. We have trust and fear, and I threw in a third one, silliness. but every message you say can adjust those based on what the AI thinks they should be adjusted to. So if they say they're finding a key and we say, like, can you try to fit the key anywhere, you'll see these trust went up. They're feeling a little less scared. Silliness obviously didn't change because nobody's being silly. But basically we have this system that lets the AI use the conversation to also adjust these scores. And we can also set up events that happen when a certain score passes a certain value. So what we have right now is this vent conversation. Your first goal is to calm them down by reducing their fear to less than 1. And then you'll gain their trust by telling them about yourself, which will you do by increasing the trust to greater than 8 or whatever value we want. And then we are going to take that whole conversation history and pass it into another prompt that says, like, here is the player's personality, who they are. It's basically the stories you told this character about yourself. And then we'll have a conversation with the big bad guy who locked you up in the room. Have him generate a plot of, like, oh, you told them, or if you told them that you're a lawyer. Obviously a really easy example of that is they locked you up because you put them away 10 years ago and they just got out of jail. So they can use these stories that you told yourself to construct their own persona, challenges for you to overcome, and like the plot. So if they are a criminal that you put away 10 years ago, you're learning that, and we're trying to decide if we should have you convince them to let you out as like a final goal. So you say, like, oh man, I'm really sorry, or you got the wrong guy, I'm actually a turtle. And then that's either the end of the game or not. Or if you maybe convince them to trust you enough that you can, like, convince the other person to only let one of you out or something like that. And we're basically scaling up the difficulty and also using this first conversation to build the plot, using this conversation to build a really big challenge based on the plot that you've created. And then we're considering having one big final conversation that merges all that together, has you go back and forth between talking to the camera and the vent to try and negotiate this certain outcome that you want. Like, you want to be let out. The big bad guy probably doesn't care too much if it's you or the other person, because he probably hates you both. I mean, maybe we should have a conversation goal here of, like, you learn why he locked up the other person. That could be interesting and feed into this final conversation of, like, convincing them to let you be the one that escapes. But yeah, I think this is like a good scope for the game. At most 3 conversations, maybe 2 conversations. And I think we're doing a lot of technical lifting here of, we got the scores in the conversation, we have events that happen when scores reach certain amounts. The scores are all dynamic, so you can change it per conversation, you can add them in mid-conversation. We are using one conversation to feed data into another conversation and generate stuff. And then theoretically we'll have another conversation that spans across 2 NPCs where you're kind of negotiating between 2 of them. So anybody have any ideas of any chunks of this that don't sound fun, or anything that might be more fun? Anything you'd like to try or see if it works? So we can also just get started and do this conversation. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're starting with this other prisoner's conversation. Let's take a look at how this all works. We have our Vent conversation controller, which has everything set up for the conversation. It's got our player's personality, which will store things to when they say anything about themselves. We have the assistant personality, which is effectively the personality of the NPC you're talking to. So that's going to be this sort of a terrified voice on the other side of the grate. We will add a little bit more to that, I believe. Because I do want to give them a little more guidance of like, you should believe at the start that the player is who locked you up. So let's go ahead and clear some of this out, get all ready for getting in there. And so you create this conversation, you set it all up ahead of time, you set up the scores, min, max, and initial scores. You can set up threshold triggers that happen when a score passes a threshold. This is all very customizable because we want to reuse it for all of our conversations on multiple demos. You can also set up basically all the details in the UI, really. If you're interested in all that, we did a stream on it a couple weeks ago. You can go check it out. Shout out to all of our previous streams being on our Chroma Golem YouTube channel. But let's go ahead and say, when this conversation starts, we're going to nix out silliness. We don't need that. We'll keep things nice and simple for the first conversation. We will have trust start out at 0. And we will have fear start out at 10. Maybe we actually start them both out 1 and 9, so players can see, like, if they do something wrong, it can go, if you say something that's not trustworthy, it could drop down to 0. It's a nice little safety net to teach them that stuff matters. And then let's take a look at how the conversation is set up with our system prompt, because right now we just have a game state blob that we're creating and inserting in. So if we go to conversation controller, we're building that game state blob with our message history and conversation scores, which sets everything up except for the initial system messages. And those are set up here. So we have a system message for our assistant's personality, which I think we'll also want to add instructions to. And we also have a system message for the game's overall instructions. Like, in this game, the player found themselves locked in a basement-like room adjacent to the room you've been locked into. The player found a lighter, you noticed a flicker of flame, and so on. And then we start with a random message from the assistant. But let's take a look at this, because we do want to have, let's say, throw in another text area of public string instructions. And we want to include that in our full system prompt that we pass into the conversation. So refer to yourself as this personality, never admit you're an AI model. Thanks OpenAI. Your personality and details are outlined below and should remain consistent. Let's say Your instructions for this conversation very important and must be followed at all times. They are listed below. And then we will throw in instructions. And it's a very rough prompt, obviously. We'll do some testing on verbiage and what works and what doesn't, because it's always nice to minimize the number of tokens you're using, but you do end up with a lot of like, this is very important and you should always listen to it sometimes. Sometimes you can take it out. But now we have that included in our full system prompt, which gets included in the initial conversation history. So if we go over to our personality of the character, which I have right here, now we can give them some instructions. You have been locked dark room for days without any without hearing anything from anyone. You see a flicker of light from the vent and assume that it's coming from your captor. You are terrified and don't know what to think. You don't know why you were locked up. Alright, that should be enough for now. And let's go ahead and where do we want all these conversation events to live? Because they need to be functions. Let's go ahead and say like, let's do like a conversation event controller, which we'll just define them all on for now. We might move them around later. Let's say conversation event controller, and that'll let us write functions that we can call from the actual conversation controller to manipulate the world or the conversation or whatever. So got this guy. How is the editor on stream? Should I make this text a little larger for anybody? But what we've got here, we can say for our conversation HUD, we'll define a void player has calmed down other prisoner event. Let's make that public. I think we need to. So that can trigger when fear is less than 2. And we'll just trigger it once, but that will go ahead and we can say quest manager dot remove quest, calm down the voice. And we will go ahead and add that quest when we start the conversation. So conversation will start, you'll get that quest, you'll calm them down, and then that'll be removed as an objective. And we can go ahead and add a new objective for, let's see, what do we have? Gain their trust by telling them about yourself. Sure, that sounds perfect. And so maybe at that point, that could be when we add the trust bar. I don't know if it makes more sense to add it then and just have a fear score originally, or have them both. Maybe just the fear score originally is a little easier to like ramp up and understand if you start this conversation and there's only one score to deal with. But it's kind of cool to see that messages can affect both. I wonder how hard it would be to set up a score from here. So our scores are defined way down yonder. Conversation score, which would be super easy to set up, but I do wonder how hard it'd be to set up these threshold triggers. But, you know, let's give it a shot. I think it'd make more sense if you start the conversation and there's just the fear bar. It's really easy to understand that that's what you want to be manipulating with your messages. That's how you interact with this game through the conversation, is you send a message that updates. And then once you've done that, we increase the complexity by adding a second one. Your messages update both, so that's a cool reveal at that point that doesn't get lost in like the initial understanding the UI. And then you have more of a balance. So we could have even, we have this initial player calms down the other prisoner, and then you get another quest to gain their trust. But if in doing so you make them fearful again and their fear goes above 5, we can trigger that initial quest of like calm down the voice and have you kind of cycle back and do that again if one of the scores goes too high. But let's see if we can set up this trust conversation threshold trigger, because I think that'll be key. And if we want to spend the effort in adding it dynamically mid-conversation, or if we want to just hide it at the beginning. I think long-term we want to do the first one so we can manipulate it more. We just haven't built out like the API for interacting with it. But let's say finish the fear quest objective, start the trust quest objective, and that's when we will create a conversation score for trust. And I think we can just say initialize it like this. Yeah. Min score of 0, max score of 10, current score of, you know, if we hide it at first, then the score can be updating through the conversation and it might have a more realistic value when we first show it. But maybe we just initialize it to 1 or 2. Let's do it to 2 originally, because we don't want to start at a point where it's too close to either end state. We kind of saw that with our first demo, Smack to the Future, where the conversation was based around a heat score. You're beating up people on the street, people show up and you have to convince them, or not people show up, police show up and you have to convince them you're innocent. And the heat score is based on how many people you beat up on the street. So if you beat up nobody, they just show up and they're like, oh, okay, you're innocent, and then you skip the whole conversation altogether. Or if you beat up everybody, they show up and say, hey, you're in jail now, you lose. So it's kind of nicer when you have that known starting value to make balancing a little bit easier. Let's say we've got our trust score, and then we want to set up a threshold trigger for it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's call that gained trust event. And threshold of, let's say, 8 is a little easier than 9. We'll say trigger type is equal to greater than, put that first, a little bit nicer. Repeatability is once, and then the events that we want to trigger, I'm not quite sure how to initialize these quite yet, but if we say trigger events is equal to, let's go ahead and let's define public void player has earned other prisoners trust. Wow, I kind of butchered that. Prisoners trust. And so here we want to use that. Let's go ahead and head to the internet. Initialize Unity event via script. Looks relevant to me. So we could have a class that inherits from it, but I don't think that's exactly what we want. I wonder if we already have a threshold trigger somewhere, we could grab that and potentially just change the function called. Seems a little janky. Let's go back. I mean, I guess I can actually just in our conversation event controller, we can say public Unity event, right? That's what it's called, Unity event. On player has gained other prisoners trust. And then we'll set that, and we can say, what was it called? Trigger events is, I think we can just say on, right? Because it's a Unity event, we don't need to wrap it. And then in the editor, we just basically do the same thing. We were just setting it up here, which I think is fine. We can call ourselves and has earned another prisoner's trust. Let's make our verbiage a little bit more consistent. Has gained other prisoners' trust. I think that's fine. So now we just need the reference back to the conversation controller. Hey, Munsmo, a little bit of a tongue twister. Thanks for joining. I'm working on a little horror demo using AI, basically layering a bunch of AI systems together to power some conversations that effectively generate the plot and generate characters' personality, stuff like that. I'll jump in real fast so you can see kind of what we're doing. But you wake up in this dark room, lights are flickering, not really a lot to do. We'll pad it all out later. We're just getting the core gameplay working, but you pick up this lighter, you head over to this corner, pushes out of the way, and talk to this vent, which triggers a AI conversation from somebody who is locked in the room next to you. They think that you are the person who has locked them up, and your first goal is to convince them to calm them down effectively. We're building that right now. You've got these scores that are powered by the AI system, so they look at the conversation history, they look at the personalities, they look at what you've said, and every time you say something, it adjusts the scores. And then we have events that happen that trigger when a score passes over a certain threshold. So your first goal is to calm this person down. You want to get that fear down to 1, and then it'll trigger another goal that adds trust to the system. We're swapping that out right now, and it'll be to gain their trust by telling them some stories about you. And then we're going to use those stories in another AI system that basically generates the plot of the main villain, which says like, oh, here's why I locked you up. If you say, I'm a doctor, I was working, I don't know why I'm here. When we switch you over to the conversation with the main villain who locked you up, they can say, oh yeah, you operated on my son and said he was fine and he died the next day. So I locked you up, and then it's your goal to convince them to let you out. Like, oh yeah, that he looked fine, I don't know what happened, blah, blah, blah. So it's a very conversation-driven, layered AI approach, and we are building it out to see whether it's fun or not. And while we're doing that, we're building up this library for conversations so we can use that in other games. We've got some cozy games planned, some RPGs. We are working on another hacker simulator type thing. So really all of those have you talking to NPCs, and so we're trying to think of ways to make each conversation with an NPC still grounded in the game world, but able to give you little mini games that you can tackle if you want. You can write your own messages to tackle it your own way, or use kind of these generated conversation trees. So that's kind of what we're building right now. We are setting up the events for the first objective. We've done this introduction. We have a little quest system that has objectives that guide you along, since it's a little weird to jump into. Once you pass that, you're going to start the conversation with the other prisoner on the other side of the wall through the vent. They're going to see the little flicker of your lighter through the vent. That's how they know to talk to you. Your first goal is to calm them down. So in that conversation screen, you've got the fear score. You got to reduce it. Then you gain their trust by telling them about yourself. And then we use that to produce the next conversation, which is kind of the plot of the game. You've unknowingly created a character that you're playing as, and from that we can generate a villain of why they have done what they've done to you, and you can then try and convince them that you're actually a good guy, let them out please. We're still figuring out like how we want the ending to look, so if you've got any ideas, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm just gonna code away a little bit more. So I'm actually unsure why this is now missing. Did we unset it? Does it unset when we play? Let me replay real fast. Okay, maybe we just said it wrong. So what we've got is we have an event that can fire when the fear is less than 2, and that fires player has calmed down other prisoner. that's what's going to add the trust score to the conversation, mid-conversation, so we can then trigger another objective of gain their trust by telling them about yourself. And then when that is complete, which is when the trust score, which starts at 2, ranges from 0 to 10, passes 8, then we fire off player has gained other prisoner's trust. I wonder if we can just... No, we can't. Maybe that's actually how we would... New Unity event... No, we'll just keep it like we have. But what we need right here is a reference back to that conversation controller. So we'll add that as well. Chroma conversation controller. So that's what will allow us to say we add that score. I don't think I've added that quite yet, but that is probably what we should add. So since we build this game state on every message, we should be able to just add scores mid-message instead of having to initialize it with all of them. So we'll give that a try. Let me go ahead and add us on a little interface for public void add conversation score. And do we need to call setup conversation scores again? We probably do actually, because that builds the UI for showing them. So yeah, that gets called on start. And then, yeah, we want to call that again anytime we add or remove one. So let's go ahead and add conversation score with that. We want to make sure that our trust dot threshold triggers is including this threshold trigger we just created. And let's go ahead and make that a little easier. We're starting at 9. Let's start at 5, and then we'll trigger that when we get to 4, just for testing. So if we reduce by 1, then we should see trust added to the conversation. And we're going to go ahead and remove trust from the start. So when we go in, we should see just trust in the initial conversation. When we reduce it, or just fear, and when we reduce it, we'll see trust added in, I think. So just fear, great. I'm scared too. Do you know who brought us here? And still got that bug where if we click in here, are you also trapped in this place? Cool, we reduced fear to 8. I guess we probably want to also make it happen if it's less than or equal to, I guess. But I'm also trapped here. I'm trying to find a way out. We need to keep our cool and work this out together. We've reduced fear. We got the objective by saying gain their trust by telling them about yourself. We need to work on the UI a little bit. But we didn't add fear to the UI, interestingly. Do we have fear? Oh, you know what? We never set the reference to the conversation controller. So let me try that again, but luckily it wasn't too hard. Let's go ahead and on the conversation event controller, let's grab our conversation controller so we can actually add scores to it. And let's try that once more. Alright, please let me out. I didn't do anything. I'm trapped in this room like you. Are you okay? We have increased the fear. We need to work together. Do you see anything useful? let's calm down and think this through. Cool. So that hit our objective. Fear is below 6. We gained an objective for gain their trust. And now we can steer the conversation towards telling them about themselves. I think what we want to do is adjust or maybe add a system message saying your goal now should be asking questions about the player or something, just to get them on the same page of making sure that it's not an abrupt change for the player to be like, let me tell you about myself. We need them to ask something at least. So maybe we move this quest display down here just for this demo. Since we're not using that space that would normally be for your inventory system, let's go ahead and do that just to make sure that it doesn't overlap with the UI and prevent us from needing to add more stuff. We'll just move it for there. We want to do the styling later, so it'll be fine. But let's see here. I think in our conversation controller, let's add a method for adding a system message, unless we can use this. But we probably don't need to do all of this. I mean, I guess all it's going to do is draw the message history. We only need to redraw the messages if it's not equal to system or we are showing system messages. And same with scrolling. So let's just put that in a block. And if the role is assistant, then we generate new suggested responses. If it's user, we generate a response. Let's move this guy up here, just because logically they should probably go together. I just don't want them to be a long nested if statement. Cool, so now actually we can probably just use this method, because if we pass in a system message and show system messages as false, really the only thing it's gonna trigger is this, which is exactly what we would do in a add system message method. So let's go ahead and say direct the conversation toward learning more about the player, and then we will say conversation controller dot add message, and that takes a conversation message, so we'll say new conversation message. And oh, I can't remember I think that's a wrapper around, yeah, the chat message. So we'll construct that. You know, let's just build a constructor for it. We've initialized it so many different ways. Let's say string message, string role, and I guess message overrides our actual message, so message text. This guy has that. So that'll construct our underlying message. Our score changes will be zeros because nothing has changed. And here we can now just say system, right, message first, and then let's do the role first. That's a little nicer, I think. Role's always going to be nice and short, and it'd be nice to see that at the beginning of the line instead of having to scroll all the way over and see who said what. So system says you've calmed down a little bit, and are now interested in who it is you're talking to. You should ask them some questions about themselves. So that might be enough to direct the conversation more towards kind of exfiltrating this data about the persona the character is playing as. Let's go ahead and keep that all in a nice block together. And maybe we'll show system messages in the next playthrough just to make sure that's all working, but let's make sure that everything is... Oh, right, the places where we have initialized it. So let's go ahead and... This is a... Let's add one more initializer for this case. Score changes, right. So message is now that, score changes is that, so now we can just say conversation message is new conversation message with our role of user, our message, and our null score changes, which is different from the initialized dictionary because it means there are no changes. Now, what did we break? Add message to chat history does not exist. Did we lose our context or something? Wait, where did we get message? Oh, right, suggested response. And parentheses. Now you, conversation message does not exist. Oh, right. No curly brace needed. Okay, cool. So that's cleaned up a little bit. We can now initialize conversation messages a little bit easier. Let's do that the other two places that we're doing it in. So here, we now have user custom input and null because the player sends a custom message of this which does not have changes. That seems incorrect. Let's look at our old logic. Score changes of null should oh right, we have null meaning that the changes are loading. The empty dictionary means it has a value, it has been set to 0. And we're clearing out the field. What we want to do, I believe, while we're in here, let's go look at our placeholder text, custom input, write your custom message here. Can we add that to, yeah, the placeholder, not the actual input field. So here, that should fix our bug of if you click into the input field and click out, it won't send it as if it's a message you wrote. Cool. One more initialization. Here we can just say raw message for each raw message. So this is raw message dot role, raw message dot content, and then we say a new dictionary to say that these messages from the NPC did not change any scores. They are not null because they are not loading any changes. They will never change the score. Do we have too many curly brace or parentheses or too few? Cool, so that's looking good. Let me check in on chat, see how things are looking. Cool. So now let's head to our conversation controller. Let's enable system messages and let's run through with the idea now that that looks a little bit high. Let's go ahead and remove this down just a tad. But the idea is that when we've calmed the NPC down, the conversation should naturally shift more towards them asking questions about you. And we're showing the system messages to make sure that that is the case. And I see on stream my camera's a little covering up the quest objectives, but that should be fine for now. Cool. So right, the system message is very long and we don't have scrolling set up, but it should rectify itself as we go on. Unable to find a constructor. Did we miss an instance? Oh, we need the default constructor for deserialization, I think. So let's add that in real fast. So that should be fine to just keep empty, I think, because I think the way that deserializer works is just construct it and then set each attribute manually. So let's give that another shot. Alright, we pick up the lighter, we head on over to yonder vent, push that out of the way. We cleared out our quest. This is all still overlapping because we're showing the system messages, but that's fine. Are you locked in there too? Maybe that'll decrease their fear, increases their fear, obviously. I thought I was alone in here. Let's figure out a way to escape. We're trying to get fear below 6. So let's say... Let's look around our rooms carefully. Will that calm you down? Yeah. So our event did not trigger this time, actually. Let me take a quick look at our conversation controller. When fear is less than 4 is what we're going for. Alright, so we are 4, but we still need to make it less than or equal to. But let's hit them with one more. I found a key. Looks like we can get out. Safety. Surely that'll assuage his fear. Alright, so what happened was we got our new quest objective because we completed the fear objective of calming them down. Now we have trust in the conversation. We got our new objective saying gain their trust by telling them about yourself. We added in a system message for them saying you've calmed down a little bit and are now interested in who it is you're talking to. Obviously there's something exciting going on, so they're not immediately going to ask questions. And there's a little bit of confusion here about who found the key, but I think we're on GPT 3.5 here just for testing, but we'll switch over to our own models when we get a little further on, ready to release. Okay, so I think what happened here is the prompt that we're using, which is separate from the conversation prompt, we have a separate prompt for generating suggested responses to chat history, and it's getting tripped up on the system messages because they assume they're for the user. And so the user found a key and it's generating messages as if the assistant that it's generating messages on behalf of found the key. So we will need to clean that up a little bit. Let's, for now, we know that this new system that we added to add trust works, but for now let's say assume all system messages are targeted, are instructions for the assistant speaker, not the user speaker. Okay, so that should help that a little bit. We'll come back to that. Since it's a separate system, I don't want to get too involved with it right now. But we can go ahead and not show those system messages now that we know they're working. Let's go ahead and add a trigger type of less than or greater to, or less than or equal to as well, just because we keep adding or keep hitting the exact value. Let's see, that's going to be in our let's say greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. I wonder what it would autocomplete not equal to. I don't think that logically makes any sense. But now, if we trigger type, so here we might as well add in our additional okay, so those should work now. And we'll go ahead and say fear is less than or equal to. Cool. So where we're at right now, we have a first objective, which I'm remembering we need to add when we start the conversation. So let's go ahead and add that real fast. That is calm down the voice is what we should add as an objective here. And I am very cognizant of the fact that we have all these magic strings everywhere, and not only is that bad to begin with, but they have to exactly match in order to add or remove existing ones. So if anybody has any suggestions of like where you would store those or what data structures you would use for like a list of objectives, I've thought up a few solutions, like having them in an enum somewhere and just referencing them that way, but it's kind of, everything like that kind of makes it a lot harder to add objectives to anywhere other than the end of the list. And so I'm doing this for now just to make it a little easier to jump around, but not what I would recommend. Don't really have a solution to it quite yet, but surely one of you brilliant game developers out there will pipe in and let me know what I'm doing wrong here. But this, when we first start the conversation, we should get a new objective for calm down the voice. When we calm them down, we'll remove that. We'll say gain their trust by telling them about yourself. And that will trigger our next objective here. We will say the assistant has calmed down a little bit just to make it a little clearer to our other system that's looking at the conversation history. And oops, is now interested in who the user is. The assistant should ask the user some questions about themselves and try to learn more about who they are talking to. So that's a little more verbose. Maybe that'll help with a more quick adjustment in the conversation towards this next goal. And so now we will start our current score at 2. We'll say when it's greater than or equal to 3, that's when we will trigger player has gained other prisoners' trust. And that's when the next event would happen. So we might have something here that is like a third objective when talking to this person. Like form a plan to escape, try and break down the vent so you can get together. Something really that uses both fear and trust, but you don't want to lose these scores that you've built up while also having some other objective. So for now, maybe we'll go with I kind of like the idea of convincing them to like try and break down the vent with you, which is something that might make them a little more afraid, so it might increase their fear score, and it could also decrease their trust if they still don't know that you are like not the bad guy who locked them up. Could be a trap. But most importantly, it'll also create a lot of noise to trigger an interaction from the camera, which is the real bad guy that you'll be talking to next. So in terms of how we would want to structure that, like it's not really an exciting thing to do, is only the thing that I have my hold up on. Like we might as well just not do anything at all and just end the conversation and then have the camera be like, hey, I see you, come talk to me. Like we don't really need them to do something for the sake of doing something if they've already kind of done this mechanic twice now. The only difference would be managing these two scores that they've built. But they already kind of do that here. If you're increasing the trust, we'll add an event saying if fear gets back to like 5 or more, then we get another objective to calm them back down. So we get kind of that loop there. And then that kind of does away with the need of having this third objective here, because there's nothing new, like mechanically. The original goal was you have some scores that you need to maintain while completing some other objective. But here, you need to maintain the fear while completing this objective. So I think we can do away with this objective for now. We can always add in something later. I think it's the way we've built things, it's really easy to go in and add these objectives in the middle, kind of what I was just saying about the horribly structured add quest, remove quest system needing to be perfect string matches, but that's intentional to let us come back and add stuff without having an ordered list of strings that we're referencing. But maybe we script some messages to send at the end of the message to kind of close down the conversation, get the player back, looking around their room. Maybe there's something else in the room they can find, or maybe the next time they look at the camera, that's when we trigger this conversation. So if we think realistically, this person's locked in a room, you've just calmed them down, and you've just told them a story about yourself. Maybe they're just feeling really hopeless because they thought you were somebody who was either coming to let them out or in their suffering. So they just want to like go back and sleep in their bed. So that's why they end the conversation and you're back in the room now. And so you're back to exploring. Next time you look at the camera, we'll start this next conversation. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Let's say after we've gained their trust, let's do a list of just messages that we will add to the conversation, and then we will disable the interactivity of the conversation HUD. So the player can read these new messages, but they aren't able to, or maybe they're able to respond, but the NPC doesn't respond back to them. I think that makes more sense. So you can keep saying things to the vent, but maybe unless you say something really, really compelling, like they just stop responding to you, and you need to just exit out of the conversation and go back to exploring the room. So let's say final conversation script from assistant is this new script, and we'll say I mean, we'll want to come back and polish this no matter what, really. So let's just make it nice and rough and keep going. We'll say, I'm glad to have someone else to talk to. It's been really hard the past, well, however long it's been, not having a single spin. I haven't heard a peep from anything other than the mice, the rats, and thought I'd die here without ever speaking to someone again. And then we'll say, but to be honest, I was a little hopeful when I saw your light that it meant this was the end. I guess I was wrong. And then we'll say, I'm sorry, but I think I just need a moment to myself. Don't worry though, we have all the time in the world, apparently. We apparently have all the time in the world. Alright, so that is what they will send once the player has completed all the objectives in this conversation. We will turn off the trigger for the NPC responding to user messages. So you get these messages, maybe we add in a little, you hear footsteps walking away or something, and you can keep responding to them. It'll add it to the conversation history, but they aren't going to respond back to you. And so let's say flow time between messages is just like a second each. Doesn't really matter. We just don't want them all showing up at once. And then we'll say for each string message in final conversation script. We can add it to our conversation controller. And all those aren't going to have effects on the scores, so that should be null. That is the message. We do want to, how do we want to incorporate this time? We can stick it in a numerator. You know, maybe for the sake of the demo, we'll just Send them all at once. Nice and simple. Maybe we say like, let me know if you find a way out. Let's do that in a separate message because it's kind of a important callback of, or call out of when they will talk to you again. Let me know if you find a way out. Cool, so that'll add to our conversation. We want to add a flag for whether the NPC that you're talking to should be responding to you. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say public bool NPC should respond to player messages. We'll default that to true. We will go ahead and set that to false now. So conversation controller dot that is equal to false. So simulate them leaving by just not responding to new messages. And so now when new messages get added to the conversation, if they're from the user, we only want to generate responses if that is true. Otherwise, nothing happens. Okay, so that should work. We don't have a way to exit out of the conversation, I just realized. We probably want to add that next. But I think when we do, that'll be the full first conversation. You can have the conversation. We need to tweak the values, of course, because we have them where you only need to adjust your score by 1 for quick testing. But that should cover like the basic mechanics, and we want to build a layered system on top of it for generating the next conversation, but we can do that pretty easily with our prompt system that we built. So I think everything should be working here. Let's go ahead and add a way to close out of the conversation. And then we will give it a test. So here, if we just say like a close button, do we have an X image? Probably not. Alright, we'll just do a button. I don't mind. Let's say UI button. Close conversation. We will stick it down here. And that shouldn't overlap with the quests, but might a little bit. I need to come back and do all the anchor points and everything for all this UI, which is probably going to get, pretty bonkers on every other resolution. So I'll come back and do that another time. I really am not good at that, so I've put it off, but I do know it needs done. But when we click close conversation, what we can do is trigger the conversation controller's end conversation method, which let's go look at that, make sure it does what we want it to. End conversation just hides the HUD, so it keeps the state, keeps everything else. Let's look at the start conversation method, make sure there's nothing we disabled that we want to re-enable. Don't think so, but I also want to make sure that wherever we're calling that, probably want to relock the mouse cursor. So let's actually move that into the start conversation method, and then we'll do the opposite in the end conversation method. And then here, is there anything else that we do? Start the conversation, disable the first person controls. That probably is something we want to re-enable. Cool, so that'll let us walk around, interact with stuff. Actually, enable first person controls. So that'll let us get back to interacting with the room. Cool. So that should be everything we need. I think we should just do a quick playthrough, make sure it's all working. Let's keep these to nice, easy, simple values. Current score of 2 to 3 hits that threshold, and 4 or 5 to 4 hits that threshold. Let's give it a shot. Well, let's give it a shot properly. Disable the HUD. Do the whole playthrough. Investigate your surroundings. Let's not pick up the lighter yet. Let's look in this corner, find something to help you see better. That should go away when we pick up the lighter. Investigate your surroundings should go away when we start the conversation. Calm down the voice, new objective. We probably want to give the player a name, or at least say in the prompt, like, don't use your name. Let's go with this. Should decrease fear, surely. Cool. Well, it didn't, but we still triggered it. Let me double check that is what we want. Less than or equal to 4. Well, that's a mistake. Let's double check our logic that we added in. Less than or equal to. Here, if the new value is less than or equal to the threshold. So the new value is 5 though. Right? Okay, we will add some debug there just for next time it happens. Let's say I wonder how that'll interpolate into a string. But we will get that. So let's make sure new value is printed somewhere. Okay, so next time we can actually inspect the values. But I mean, I guess we did just reload all the scripts. Let's start it again. Get our lighter. Go chat with the vent. Please let me out. Let's try to get out of here together. Fear is 5. We are on GPT-4. That's fine. New value of fear is 3. Why didn't it upload or update in the UI then? That is a bug. I'm now realizing I haven't seen anything update in a while. I wonder if these will... Okay, now they're updating. I wonder if it's related to us adding this and redrawing. We need to make sure that that happens after we update the new value instead of potentially doing it beforehand, which might override it. But we'll double check that now. But okay, so what is happening here is checking the threshold on the response generation. The response generation has the new values, which is calling the threshold events. That threshold event that is being called is this guy, which just adds a conversation score but calls setup conversation scores again. So I wonder if it's using its old value or not getting set properly. Let's take a look and see where it's actually being set. On response generation, we have our score changes. Here's where we start our coroutine to... Oh, we are lerping the new value, but it's on this score display, which goes away when we rebuild the UI. So this needs to happen after the events, because the events might redraw the UI, and we need to make sure we have... Well, this is actually stored in the data, so when we redraw, it's going to also store those score sliders, right? And it clears the dictionary at the beginning. So we will lose that reference anytime we call setup conversation scores. So I think what we need to do is just move this we are going to keep the message history, which has the score changes on it, so we don't need to adjust that. But if we grab the game score, what's our new value? Let's keep our new value as well. Score display. And then we'll want to re-grab score display after the events. So I think that should work. We will test that now, but still a little iffy on it. Because game score is conversation score. And scores is what changes, so I feel like we need to grab this, because that's what's finding the actual score based on the label match. So let's do that. Game score goes through all of our current scores, which are now new, potentially, and finds the score display of that game score, which is also new, potentially, and then starts the alert on that instead of on an old reference. I'm surprised we didn't see an error, though, is what's the most confusing. I would have expected a like no reference error if it's erroring in the way I thought it was, but we'll give it a shot. Okay. Yes, I'm here. I see a light. Yeah, we need to add a little bit of system prompt hackery to make sure that it knows the user has the light, not the assistant has the light. That is updating correctly, but that's not exactly what we're testing. We want to make sure that it's updating on the message that triggers an event that adds a score as well. Yeah, there's a key and a cell phone. I can probably call for help if, let's just say that. That should reduce the fear, surely. Okay, and it does reduce it on the same frame or same event that the trust gets added. So that does fix it. So now, that's also great. We can see the suggested messages are trying to get the user to ask about the assistant's personality, but we want the opposite. So we'll go in and update that next, but let's see what happens if we ask the assistant to tell us about themselves. It's a lot of messages. Okay. Let's go ahead and I want to reduce the suggested messages. I think it's like 3 to 5 right now. I want to do like 1 to 4 because I think it's fine to have one suggested message. I think conceptually it's really easy for a player to be like, okay, that's fine, or I don't like that, I'll write my own. There's not as many options to read through. Let's see how I think that's actually in the system prompt of suggested responses. So let's say you should generate between 1 and 4 suggested responses. Okay, so where do we mention the light is another thing we should double check. You've been locked in a dark room for days without hearing anything from anyone. You see a flicker of light from the vent and assume that it's coming from your captor. So that's how they know about the light, but when it's added to the conversation history, it's a system message, so it's directed more towards the user than the assistant. So we want to make sure that the suggested responses assumes all system messages are instructions for the assistant, but not the user. Which we're saying, but it's not doing. But we can always come back and tweak that later. That's more polishing, I'd say. Just we're trying to get the gameplay work, and we can play test and fix bugs like that once it does. So really what we want to do, let's play through again. Let's go all the way through. Let's make sure that our system that we added for ignoring the user works. Let's make sure that closing the conversation works. And that'll be the end of the first conversation. You've completed a couple objectives, and then we can move on to the big bad guy conversation. So let's say I'm in the room next to you. The fear is increasing because they're talking about how afraid they are. We need to stay calm and find a way to escape. It's really dark in here, but I feel some form of structure protruding from one of the walls. That's weird. I find a lighter in here so you can see if it's a loose brick. Sure. Alright, so we are calming them down. And now maybe instead of sending the setting the system message to say you should ask them about themselves, maybe we could have a scripted NPC message that sets the tone. We'll consider that. I want to play through. I want to get this trust up now. We got our fear down. We also eventually want to add icons to the sliders of like where the events happen, but that's more in the design phase. Slide the lighter through the vent. Is there any strange occurrence before you found yourself in this room? Got the lighter, thank you. Now I can see it's not a loose brick after all, it's just a part of the wall. Although I found a small hole might lead to something useful. I can't remember anything strange before waking up here. How about you? How did you end up here? Great, so the player doesn't realize that they are shifting the tone to asking about them, and in doing so, they are setting them up to ask about the player. And I'm noticing that, wait, this is the end of the conversation. Oh, we did it. We beat it. Okay. So yeah, passing the lighter through the vent, and that is their response. Oh, here's their response. We want to make sure that that response happens first before this ending dialogue. But it is nice to know that we can send messages now and they are not going to respond. Also on the back end, it's nice that doesn't use up any tokens. So that's nice. And we're not generating new messages either, so that's also nice. We do need to remove this objective. Let's start taking some notes so we don't end up forgetting everything. Because I've already forgotten everything. We want to remove the gain their trust by telling them about yourself objective. That has a period. We want to make sure their final message script sends after their real response. So we can probably do that by just waiting a second or something and then sending the script. Maybe we could disable the suggested responses at this point. But I think it's fine to leave there because it gives the vibe of like you're talking to a vent now. It's literally talking to a wall. So no response back is fine. And we can still send our custom messages. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't update fear or trust at all. You can still scroll through the conversation. If this closed conversation works, which it does, and great, everything, your first person controls are working again. We should be able to talk to the vent again. Okay, it resets the conversation. So we have a flag for sitting down and standing up. It obviously doesn't work. Let's go update that to resume the old conversation versus starting a new one. And after we do that, I think it'll probably be a good time for the stream to wrap up for the week. I think the first conversation is a great example of what we're going to build on the next conversation, and I want to spend some time off stream brainstorming like how I want the horror aspects to work, but I think it was a good example of what we're doing, and I don't want to give spoilers for you guys playing it. So this will probably be the last week for a little while that we're working on this demo on stream, and next week we're going to get back to probably You Are Not Alice. So let's go ahead and what did I just say I was going to fix? All right, resuming an existing conversation. So let's fix these 3 bugs, or 3 improvements, and we will call it done then. So what we've got, let's make sure that the final message script sends after their original message. So let's say float time to wait before final script is 1 second. And maybe let's increase it a little bit. Just a little bit of time so the player sees, oh, there's a new message. While they're reading it, they see more messages show up. So now we want to wait. Wait that long. How do we do that? All right, we can do an enumerator or a coroutine. Wait and display final script. Time to wait before final script. I think the time is first. Yeah. So now we will public private enumerator that. Waits for that many seconds, and then we want to do our loop here. And really we don't need to be like passing that in, but I guess we can. Okay, so this sets up our final script, waits that long, then sends it and disables new messages. That should be fine. Let's add a little note to test that. Let's remove the gain their trust by telling them about yourself objective when we've gained their trust. So that is super easy. We say remove quest for that. Complete the trust objective. And say wrap up the conversation for now. Okay, we'll double check that that works. And then our bigger change here, let's go look at our interactable script, our interactable vent. So here, when you interact with it, we have an is interacting flag. And what I was originally intending was you press E to start the conversation, and then you press E again to end the conversation, and it's going to be listening for you pressing that key because the interactable is still set up, but we removed the interactable to make sure that we're not seeing UI messages of like press E to interact with the vent again. So I think what we're going to say is has interacted, and we will say when you interact with it by pressing E, if you have a lighter, you start the conversation. If you don't have a lighter, you get a it's too dark to see what it is. And then you'll be able to close the conversation from there. But has interacted will be true. So in that case, if you have interacted, instead of saying end interaction scene, which calls end conversation, which we call from the actual conversation itself now. So we don't really need to do any of this because we're handling it all from the conversation. We only use it there. Let's get rid of that, and we will just use this to trigger the conversation. And now, instead of start interaction scene, we will say resume interaction scene. And we can basically just take out a chunk of the start interaction scene logic and say set up interaction scene visuals, and all this all this minus the initial gasp we can throw into that because it'll be common between them both. Set up interaction scene visuals. The initial interaction should handle the quests. This guy, we can just have him live in both. It's fine. Duplicated code. We set up the visuals, and then we will just set active on resuming instead of starting a new conversation, which this we should rename to start new conversation because it will clear out any existing conversation on this controller. So that should now work. Resume the existing conversation. And now we'll just call resume interaction scene here. And we don't say anything at all in the UI. So now when you go, you can interact with the vent, you can close it, and then you should be able to reopen it by interacting with the vent again, and it should have the same conversation history. So we will test that as well. So let's do that. I guess we'll just double check that interacting with the vent without the lighter says you feel something but it's too dark to see what it is. We have investigate your surroundings, find something to help you see better. That removes find something to help you see better. Pick up the lighter, inspect the air vent. Got rid of the objective, adds a new objective of calm down the voice. We still want to do the player personality where they don't have a question mark name, but I think what we'll end up doing is just have like a starting scene where you select a name and a face for your avatars, probably just like man or woman or whatever else you want. And we'll say I haven't done anything wrong. Hopefully that'll trigger lower fear, higher fear, I guess. We probably should have a setting on scores of like we have green going up, but that's not necessarily the right thing when you want a lower value. So for scores that you want to raise, like trust, green going up makes sense. But for scores you want to lower, like fear, green going down would make more sense. But I don't know if that visually is intuitive. It might make more sense for green to just always mean going up, red for always going down, and you just know which side you're going to because we'll have the icons. I'm locked in here just like you. I don't know why they did this. I found a cell phone we can probably call for help with. So hopefully that'll reduce their fear. Cool, it does by quite a lot. That's great news. It's true. Phone can be our ticket out of here, but we need to be cautious not to exhaust its battery. Now I want to actually add a phone where you manage the battery. We should first try and figure out exactly where we are before making the call. That's kind of a cool, like, branch to go down. Can you find any clues in your room? Give me a moment to check. Cool. And then you would like close the, well, we completed it because they trust us now, but we did get their message and then the final message. So let's go ahead and close the conversation and reopen it. Same conversation. Awesome. So let's double check our list. Their final message sent before the closing script. The quest objective went away, and we can resume our existing conversation. So as a little send-off, let's go ahead and look at this conversation, and let's readjust those values back to like actually playable values. Their current score of fear is going to start at 8. We want to get them down to 2, which will be, I mean, not one message. So that'll be a huge improvement. Probably like, I would guess 5 or 6 messages at least, if you're skilled at reducing their fear. And then for the other trust event, we will start the score at 2, and you want to get that up to 8. So again, more messages, more of a conversation. They'll probably go down a few messages, up a few messages, but they'll trend towards the direction you're trying to get them. So it's more of a back and forth and more of a like, it's not a hard conversation, it just takes more messages sometimes. So that just will give us more and more data to use in the next conversation, which will be, again, with the big bad we're going to generate plot about why he put you in this room based on what you've told this NPC about yourself. So I think that'll be really cool. I think that's where we will call it for this week. I've been streaming for almost 2.5 hours. I usually shoot for about 2 hours, but I stream every Tuesday. I do game development. If you're new, I am one of the founders of the Chroma Golem game studio. Me and my co-founder Andrew are building some fun demos right now on using AI in interesting ways in games. So we're kind of building these little tech demos and exploring different ways that AI enables new ways to play in games. And having these like mini games within conversations is just one of those ways. We've done other demos, and if this has been fun to you, feel free to follow me here on Twitch, or we also have a Discord that you can join. The link is in the description. Hope this doesn't duplicate my voice twice. But if you just scroll on down, Discord's right here. Jump on in. We'd love to have you. It's for game developers. It's for gamers. It's for anyone interested in AI. We got a lot of people doing fun stuff, so would love to see you guys there. Thank you for joining me this week. I will see you next week, or I might see you any other night this week. I sometimes stream games I play, but game development's on Tuesdays, and glad to have you guys here. So thank you guys. See you next week.